The thunderous sound of hooves pounding against the hard-packed earth broke the evening silence as Rose Davenport clutched her 4-year-old son Henry tightly to her chest. Their small wagon had broken down 3 miles outside of Parowan, Utah territory, and the setting sun painted the vast desert landscape in ominous shadows. It was 1876, and the West was still wild and unforgiving, especially for a young widow traveling alone with a child. "Mama, who are those men?" Henry whispered, his small fingers digging into her shoulder as the riders approached. Rose felt her heart hammering against her ribs. 5 men on horseback surrounded their wagon, dust swirling around them like devils dancing in the dying light. She recognized the leader immediately, Wade Hollister, the notorious outlaw whose gang had been terrorizing the Utah-Arizona border for months. Well, Hollister drawled, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "What do we have here? A pretty lady and her boy all alone in Grimshaw territory." "This isn't Grimshaw territory," Rose replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This is federal land." Hollister laughed, a sound like gravel under boots. "You hear that, boys? The lady knows her geography." His smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Everything from here to the Colorado River is ours, madam, and there's a toll for passing through." Rose's hand instinctively moved to the small pouch hidden in her dress, where she kept the last of her money, barely enough to start a new life in Parowan, where her cousin had promised her work in the general store. "I have little money," she said honestly. "That's a shame," Hollister replied, his eyes sliding to Henry. "But I reckon that boy would fetch a good price from the miners up north. They're always looking for young hands to work the tunnels." Rose's blood turned to ice. "You will not touch my son." "Oh, but we will," Hollister said, nodding to 2 of his men who dismounted and started toward them. "Unless you've got something better to offer." Rose backed away, shielding Henry with her body. She had nothing of value except the wedding band on her finger and the clothes on their backs. The outlaws advanced, and she knew with terrible certainty that she couldn't fight all of them. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, and one of Hollister's men howled in pain as he fell, clutching his shoulder. "That's far enough," came a deep voice from behind them. Rose turned to see a tall figure on horseback, rifle raised and ready. The man rode closer, and in the fading light, she could make out a weather-beaten face beneath the wide brim of his hat. His eyes, blue as the summer sky, were hard and unforgiving as they focused on Hollister's gang. "This doesn't concern you, stranger," Hollister called out, though his hand hovered near his pistol. "When 5 men threaten a woman and child, it becomes my concern," the stranger replied, his voice carrying across the open terrain. He moved his horse between Rose and the outlaws. "The lady and her boy are under my protection now. They'll never touch a hair on his head, madam. You have my word." Hollister sized up the newcomer, clearly calculating his odds. "You're making a mistake, mister. Do you know who I am?" "Wade Hollister," the man replied calmly. "Wanted in 3 territories. There's a $500 bounty on your head, dead or alive." A tense silence followed as Hollister and his remaining men exchanged glances. 4 against 1 weren't bad odds, but the stranger's confidence suggested he wasn't alone. "We'll meet again," Hollister finally said, signaling his men to retreat. "And when we do, you'll wish you'd minded your own business." "Looking forward to it," the stranger replied, not lowering his rifle until the outlaws had disappeared into the gathering darkness. Only then did he turn to Rose, his expression softening. "Are you and the boy hurt, madam?" "No, we're unharmed," Rose said, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, mister." Flynn Finley," he dismounted in one fluid motion. "Let me take a look at your wagon." "I might be able to fix it." Rose watched as Finley examined the broken axle, his movements efficient and purposeful. Henry, still clutching her skirts, stared up at their rescuer with wide eyes. "Are you a lawman?" Henry asked suddenly. Finley glanced up, a small smile touching his lips. "Sometimes. Right now, I'm just a man trying to help a lady and her son get to where they need to go. "We're heading to Parowan," Rose explained. "My cousin Martha owns the general store there." Finley nodded. "Martha Reynolds, I know her. Good woman." He straightened up, dusting his hands on his pants. "Your axle's split clean through. Can't fix it here." He looked at the darkening sky. "Night's coming fast. My cabin's about a mile from here. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow I'll take you into town." Rose hesitated. The thought of spending the night alone with a stranger, even one who had just saved them, made her uneasy. Finley seemed to read her thoughts. "You'll have the cabin to yourselves, madam. I'll sleep in the stable with my horses." There was something in his eyes, a quiet dignity, a steadfast honor that made Rose believe him. "Thank you, Mr. Finley. We accept your offer." Flynn's cabin was simple but well built, nestled against a rocky outcropping that sheltered it from the harsh desert winds. Inside, a large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and handcrafted furniture gave the space a warm, lived-in feel. "It's not much," Flynn said as he lit a lamp, "but it's dry and safe." Rose took in the clean, swept floors, the neatly stacked books on a small shelf, the carefully arranged cooking utensils. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Flynn helped her bring in their few belongings from the wagon, then showed her where he kept his supplies. "Make yourselves at home. There's venison stew in the pot, should still be warm. I'll be just outside if you need anything." After he left, Rose settled Henry at the table and served him the stew, which was surprisingly flavorful. As Henry ate, she found herself drawn to the bookshelf. Among the practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry, she was surprised to find several volumes of poetry Wordsworth, Keats, and Tennyson. Later, after tucking Henry into the bed Flynn had offered them, Rose sat by the fire, turning over the day's events in her mind. Her husband Thomas had been dead for nearly a year now, taken by a fever that swept through their small Kansas town. With no family there and mounting debts, she had sold what little they had to finance their journey west to Utah, where Martha had promised them a fresh start. Now, as she stared into the dancing flames, Rose wondered what kind of man Flynn Finley was. A bounty hunter, perhaps, or a lawman as Henry had guessed. Whatever his profession, she was grateful he had appeared when he did. Morning came with the soft sound of chopping wood. Rose dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Flynn splitting logs, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He paused when he saw her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Morning, Mrs. Davenport. Sleep well." "Yes, thank you," she replied, noticing for the first time the fine lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "And please call me Rose." Flynn nodded. "Rose, then. I've fed and watered the horses. Once your boy is up, we can head to town." "Mr. Finley, Flynn," he corrected gently. "Flynn," she amended. "I want to thank you properly for what you did yesterday. Those men, what they threatened to do to Henry." "No need for thanks," he said firmly. "Any decent man would have done the same." But Rose knew that wasn't true. In her experience, decent men were rare, especially in these untamed territories. Henry emerged from the cabin then, rubbing sleep from his eyes. When he spotted Flynn, his face lit up. "Are you going to take us to town now, Mr. Finley?" "That's right, partner," Flynn said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Let's get you and your ma to Parowan." Flynn helped them onto his sturdy wagon, which he had hitched to a team of 2 sorrel horses. He had transferred their belongings from the broken wagon and covered everything with a tarp to protect against dust. As they traveled, Flynn pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the territory. Rose learned he had been in Utah for 5 years, having come west after the war. "Were you a soldier?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "I was, with the Union Army. 7th Cavalry." Rose sensed there was more to the story, but Flynn changed the subject, asking about her plans in Parowan. She told him about Martha's offer of work and lodging above the store. "It's not much, but it's a chance to start over," she said, watching the landscape roll by. "Thomas, my husband, he always wanted to come west, said there were opportunities here that a man couldn't find back east." He wasn't wrong, Flynn said quietly. The West has its hardships, but there's a freedom here you can't find elsewhere. A chance to build something meaningful. They arrived in Parowan by midday. The small town consisted of one main street lined with buildings constructed of red brick and rough-hewn timber. People moved about with purpose, and wagons creaked along the dusty road. It wasn't much, but to Rose, it represented hope. Flynn directed his wagon to Reynolds' General Store, a 2-story building with a covered porch and large windows displaying merchandise. As they pulled up, a plump woman with graying hair stepped outside, her eyes widening in recognition. "Rose, is that you?" Martha Reynolds hurried down the steps, arms outstretched. "Martha." Rose embraced her cousin warmly. "It's so good to see you." Martha bent down to Henry's level. "And this must be Henry. My, how you've grown since I last saw you." She straightened and noticed Flynn for the first time. "Marshal Finley, I didn't expect to see you today." Rose looked at Flynn in surprise. "Marshal?" Flynn adjusted his hat somewhat awkwardly. "I was going to mention it, but it never seemed the right time." "Flynn rescued us yesterday," Rose explained to Martha. "Our wagon broke down and we were accosted by outlaws." Martha's hand flew to her mouth. "Good heavens, are you both all right?" "We're fine, thanks to the marshal here," Rose said, looking at Flynn with newfound respect. Martha insisted they all come inside for refreshments. While Henry explored the fascinating array of goods in the store, Martha showed Rose the rooms upstairs where they would live. "It's not fancy," Martha said apologetically, "but it's clean and safe." "It's perfect," Rose assured her, taking in the simple furnishings and the window that looked out over the main street. Downstairs, Flynn was preparing to leave. "I should get back to my rounds," he said, settling his hat on his head. Rose felt an unexpected pang at his departure. "Thank you again for everything, Marshal." "Just doing my job, madam," he replied, but his eyes lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "If you need anything, my office is just down the street." After Flynn left, Martha gave Rose a knowing look. "He's a good man, our Marshal. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair and honest. Came here about 3 years ago." Town wasn't much more than a way station then, overrun with troublemakers passing through. "He cleaned it up pretty quick." "He saved our lives," Rose said simply. "Well," Martha said, patting Rose's hand, "Parowan's a small town. I reckon you'll be seeing plenty more of Flynn Finley." Martha's prediction proved accurate. Over the next few weeks, Flynn became a regular visitor to the general store. Sometimes he came on official business, but more often than not, he would arrive with small gifts, a jar of honey from a local beekeeper, a book he thought Rose might enjoy, a hand-carved wooden horse for Henry. Rose found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. There was something about Flynn's quiet strength and gentle manner that drew her to him. And Henry adored him, following him around whenever possible, peppering him with questions about being a lawman. One evening, about a month after their arrival in Parowan, Flynn invited them to join him for a picnic by the creek that ran just outside of town. It was a beautiful spot, with cottonwood trees providing shade and wildflowers dotting the grassy banks. As Henry played nearby, catching grasshoppers in a jar Flynn had brought for that purpose, Rose and Flynn sat on a blanket, watching the water flow by. "You've settled in well," Flynn observed. "Martha says you're a natural at the store," Rose smiled. "I enjoy the work, and everyone has been so kind. It feels like we could make a real home here." Flynn seemed to choose his next words carefully. "I'm glad to hear that. I've grown fond of having you and Henry in Parowan." Rose felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "We've grown fond of being here," she replied softly. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of the creek and Henry's delighted laughter as he chased butterflies. "Rose," Flynn began, then hesitated. "I know it hasn't been long since you lost your husband, and I would never presume to. That is, I understand if you're not ready, but I wanted you to know that he was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats." Flynn was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Take Henry and get behind those trees," he ordered, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of a lawman. Rose didn't question him. She called Henry to her and hurried to the shelter of the cottonwoods, her heart racing with fear. From their hiding place, she could see Flynn standing alert, watching the trail that led to the creek. 3 riders appeared, and even from a distance, Rose recognized the lead rider, Wade Hollister. Her blood ran cold. Flynn stood his ground as the riders approached, his posture deceptively casual but his hand never far from his weapon. "Marshal Finley," Hollister called out, reining in his horse a few yards away. "Fancy meeting you here." "This is a strange direction for you to be riding, Hollister," Flynn replied evenly. "Parowan's off limits to you and your men," Hollister laughed. "Is that so? Last I checked, this is still open country." "What do you want?" Flynn demanded. "Just passing through," Hollister said, though his eyes scanned the area as if looking for something or someone. "Heard there was a new lady in town, widow with a young boy. Thought I might pay my respects." Flynn's voice hardened. "Mrs. Davenport is under my protection." "I suggest you forget about her and her son." A slow smile spread across Hollister's face. "So that's how it is, the marshal's sweet on the widow." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You know, Finley, a woman like that needs a real man, not some washed-up soldier playing lawman." Flynn's expression didn't change, but Rose could see the tension in his shoulders. "You've got 5 seconds to turn around and ride out of here, or I'm taking you in." Hollister's hand drifted toward his gun. "You think you can take all 3 of us, Marshal?" "I know I can put a bullet in you before you clear leather," Flynn replied coldly. "Whether your friends want to die for you is their choice." For a long, tense moment, no one moved, then Hollister raised his hands slightly. "Another time, perhaps, when you don't have your gun hand-free." His gaze shifted to the trees where Rose and Henry were hiding. "Tell the widow I'll be seeing her soon." With that, Hollister wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following close behind. Flynn waited until they were out of sight before hurrying to Rose and Henry. "Are you all right?" Rose nodded, though she was shaking. "How did he know we were here?" "He must have been watching the town," Flynn said grimly. "I should have been more careful." He knelt down to Henry's level. "You were very brave, partner, just like a real deputy." Henry beamed at the praise, seemingly unaware of the danger they had just faced. Flynn gathered their picnic things quickly. "I'm taking you both back to town. It's not safe out here." As they rode back to Parowan, Rose couldn't stop thinking about Hollister's threat. "What does he want with us, Flynn?" Flynn's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure. Could be he's holding a grudge because I interfered with his plans, or maybe he's got something bigger in mind. Hollister's not just an outlaw, he's trying to control this whole territory. Intimidation is how he operates." "What are we going to do?" "For now, you and Henry stay close to town. I'll double the patrols and wire the federal marshal in Salt Lake City." Hollister's wanted for enough crimes to hang him 10 times over. It's time we brought him in. Back in Parowan, Flynn insisted on walking Rose and Henry to the general store. Martha was alarmed to hear about their encounter and immediately agreed that Rose and Henry should remain in town. That night, after Henry was asleep, Rose sat by the window of their rooms, looking out at the quiet street below. She could see Flynn standing in front of his office across the way, his figure illuminated by the light from the window behind him. He seemed to be watching her building, standing guard. Rose touched the glass, wishing she could reach out to him, tell him how his protective nature moved her, how his quiet strength gave her courage. In the short time she had known him, Flynn Finley had become important to her in ways she hadn't expected. The thought of him facing Hollister and his gang filled her with dread. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Flynn organized the townsmen into additional patrols, and telegraph wires were sent to neighboring settlements warning of Hollister's presence in the area. Rose noticed that Flynn seemed increasingly tired, dark circles forming under his eyes as he tried to maintain his regular duties while keeping special watch over her and Henry. One evening, when Flynn came by the store just before closing, Rose insisted he join them for dinner upstairs. He protested weakly, but finally agreed. As they ate the simple meal Rose had prepared, she noticed how he relaxed slightly in their company, some of the tension easing from his shoulders as Henry regaled him with stories about his day. After dinner, Henry begged Flynn to read him a story before bed. Rose watched from the doorway as the tough lawman sat on the edge of Henry's bed, reading from a book of frontier tales with different voices for each character. Henry was asleep before the story ended, his small hand still clutching Flynn's sleeve. Flynn carefully extracted himself and joined Rose in the small sitting room. "He's a good boy," he said softly. "You've done a fine job with him." "Thank you," Rose replied, touched by his words. "It hasn't been easy since Thomas died, but Henry makes it worthwhile. How long were you married?" Flynn asked, settling into the chair across from her. 6 years. We were childhood sweethearts back in Kansas." Rose smiled at the memory. "Thomas was a dreamer, always had big plans. The farm in Kansas was just the beginning. He wanted to move west, maybe try his luck in the goldfields or start a ranch." "I'm sorry you lost him," Flynn said sincerely. Rose studied Flynn's face in the lamplight. "What about you? Have you ever been married?" A shadow crossed his features. "No." "Never found the right time or the right woman," he paused. "Or maybe I never let myself. The war. It changed me, made me wary of getting too close to anyone." "And now?" Rose asked, hardly daring to breathe. Flynn's blue eyes met hers. "Now I'm starting to think I might have been wrong about that." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken feelings. Then Flynn cleared his throat and stood. "I should go, early start tomorrow." Rose walked him to the door. "Flynn," she said, placing her hand on his arm, "please be careful. Hollister seems dangerous." "Don't worry about me," he said, covering her hand with his. "I've dealt with men like him before." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Rose." Rose stood in the doorway long after he had gone, her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been. The next morning brought news that changed everything. A rider from a ranch 10 miles south arrived in Parowan with word that Hollister's gang had raided the property, stealing horses and supplies. 2 ranch hands had been shot, one fatally. Flynn organized a posse immediately. "We'll track them before the trail goes cold," he told Rose when she came to his office after hearing the news. "This might be our best chance to catch them." "How long will you be gone?" she asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "A few days at most," he replied, checking his rifle. "Deputy Miller will stay in town. If there's any trouble, go straight to him." Rose nodded, though she felt a growing sense of dread. "Please come back safely." Flynn paused in his preparations, his eyes softening as they met hers. "I will, I promise." He hesitated, then stepped closer and cupped her face in his hand. "Rose, when I get back, there's something I want to talk to you about, something important." Her heart quickened. "I'll be waiting." Flynn and his posse of 6 men rode out of Parowan an hour later. Rose and Henry stood on the porch of the general store, watching until they disappeared from sight. 2 days passed with no word from Flynn or the posse. Rose tried to keep busy with work at the store, but her thoughts constantly drifted to Flynn, wondering where he was, if he was safe. Henry asked about him frequently, and Rose did her best to reassure the boy while managing her own anxiety. On the 3rd day, just as Rose was closing the store, Deputy Miller burst in, his young face grave. "Mrs. Davenport, you need to come quick. The marshal's back." Rose's heart leaped. "Is he all right?" Miller's expression told her everything. "He's been shot. Doc Harrison is with him now." Rose quickly arranged for Martha to stay with Henry and rushed to the small building that served as Parowan's doctor's office. Inside, she found Flynn lying on a narrow bed, his face pale beneath his tan, a bandage wrapped around his torso visible beneath his open shirt. "Flynn," she gasped, hurrying to his side. His eyes opened at the sound of her voice. "Rose," he whispered, trying to sit up. "Don't move," she ordered, gently pressing him back down. What happened? Dr. Harrison, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, stepped forward. Bullet grazed his side. He's lost blood, but he'll recover if he doesn't do anything foolish like try to get out of bed too soon. Flynn grimaced. We tracked Hollister to a canyon about 20 miles south. They were waiting for us. Ambush. 2 of my men were wounded and we had to fall back. Rose took his hand in hers. You're safe now, that's all that matters. Flynn's grip tightened. No, Rose, it's not safe. Hollister knows where we are. He could come after you and Henry at any time. We'll increase the patrols, Deputy Miller said from the doorway. The whole town's behind you, Marshal. Flynn shook his head. Not enough. Hollister's got at least 15 men. We're outgunned. What are you suggesting? Rose asked, a chill running through her at his tone. You and Henry should leave Parowan, Flynn said, his eyes pleading. Just until we deal with Hollister. Go to Salt Lake City. You'll be safe there. Rose stared at him in disbelief. Leave. This is our home now. I won't be driven away by fear. Rose, please. Flynn's voice grew urgent. Hollister is obsessed. He wants to control everything and everyone in this territory, and he sees me as standing in his way. He'll use you and Henry to get to me. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. Perhaps we should let the marshal rest. This discussion can wait until morning. Rose reluctantly agreed, though her mind was racing with Flynn's warning. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead. We'll talk tomorrow. Rest now. But Flynn caught her hand before she could leave. Promise me you'll think about what I said. Please, Rose. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you or Henry because of me. The raw emotion in his voice struck her deeply. I promise to think about it. Rose walked back to the general store through the darkening streets of Parowan, her thoughts in turmoil. The idea of leaving just when they were beginning to build a life here was devastating. And yet, the thought of Henry in danger was unbearable. When she reached the store, she found it locked and dark. Puzzled Martha should have been there with Henry. Rose used her key to enter. Martha. She called out. Henry. Silence greeted her. Growing concerned, she lit a lamp and looked around. Nothing seemed disturbed. She hurried upstairs to their rooms, calling for her son and cousin. The rooms were empty, panic rising in her throat. Rose raced back downstairs and out onto the street. She was about to run to the deputy's office when she noticed a piece of paper nailed to the store's door that she had missed in her haste. With trembling hands, she tore it free and held it up to read by the light spilling from the windows. Mrs. Davenport, I have your boy and the old woman. If you want to see them alive again, come to Grimshaw Canyon alone. Tell the marshal and they die. You have until dawn. W.H. Rose felt the world spinning around her. Hollister had Henry. Her sweet, innocent boy was in the hands of a ruthless killer, and Martha too. She sagged against the doorframe, fighting waves of fear and nausea. Her first instinct was to run to Flynn, but Hollister's warning was clear. If she involved the law, Henry and Martha would die. She couldn't risk their lives. Rose forced herself to think clearly. Grimshaw Canyon was where Flynn had said they'd tracked Hollister, about 20 miles south of Parowan. If she left now, on horseback, she could reach it by dawn. Moving with desperate purpose, Rose went to the small stable behind the store where Martha kept her old mare. The gentle horse wasn't built for speed, but she was sturdy and knew the trails. Rose quickly saddled her, fighting back tears as she worked. She had no weapons except a small knife she kept for opening packages at the store. She tucked it into her boot, knowing it would be little use against Hollister's gang, but unwilling to go completely defenseless. As she led the mare out of the stable, Rose cast one last glance toward the doctor's office where Flynn lay wounded. Going alone was madness, but she had no choice. Henry was everything to her. She would give her life for his without hesitation. With a silent prayer, Rose mounted the mare and rode out of Parowan, following the south trail toward Grimshaw Canyon. The night was clear and cold, with a bright moon lighting her way. Rose rode steadily, pushing the mare as much as she dared. Her mind raced with terrible images of what might be happening to Henry and Martha, and she had to force herself not to give in to panic. Hours passed, and the terrain grew rougher. The trail wound through rocky outcroppings and sparse forests of juniper and pine. In the distance, she could make out the dark outline of the canyon against the star-filled sky. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon when Rose reached the entrance to Grimshaw Canyon. She slowed the tired mare to a walk, her eyes scanning the shadowy walls rising on either side. The canyon was eerily quiet, with no sign of Hollister or his men or of Henry and Martha. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "I'm here, Hollister. Where are my son and cousin?" A low chuckle came from behind her. Rose whirled around to see Wade Hollister stepping out from behind a boulder, a pistol in his hand. "Right on time, Mrs. Davenport. I admire punctuality." "Where are they?" Rose demanded, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Safe, for now." Hollister gestured with his gun. "Dismount, please." Rose slid from the saddle, her legs nearly buckling beneath her after the long ride. "I want to see them." "All in good time," Hollister said, approaching her with a predatory smile. "First, we need to have a little chat about your martial friend." "I did what you asked," Rose said, backing away slightly. "I came alone. Now please let me see my son." Hollister's smile widened. "You will, but first," he was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Rose turned to see several riders entering the canyon. Her heart sank when she recognized Flynn at the lead, his face drawn with pain but his eyes burning with determination. Deputy Miller and 4 other men rode with him. "Finley," Hollister spat. "Should have known you'd show up to ruin the party." Flynn's gaze locked with Rose's for a moment, relief and anger battling in his expression. "Let her go, Hollister. This is between you and me," Hollister laughed. "Actually, it involves the boy and the old woman, too. Bring them out, boys." From a narrow side canyon emerged 2 of Hollister's men, leading a terrified-looking Martha and Henry. Henry's face lit up when he saw Rose. "Mama!" "Henry!" Rose tried to run to him, but Hollister caught her arm. "Not so fast," he growled. "Nobody moves until I say so." Flynn and his men had stopped about 30 yards away, their hands hovering near their weapons. "What do you want, Hollister?" Flynn called out. "What I've always wanted," Hollister replied. "Control of this territory, and you, Marshal, are the main obstacle. So here's my proposal. You turn in your badge, leave Utah, and never come back. In exchange, the widow and her brat get to live." Flynn's expression didn't change, but Rose could see the calculation in his eyes. "And if I refuse?" Hollister pressed his gun against Rose's temple. "Then I kill her first so you can watch. Then the boy." A terrible silence fell over the canyon. Rose could hear her heart pounding in her ears. She looked at Henry, standing frightened next to Martha, and then at Flynn, whose eyes had never left hers. "Don't do it, Flynn," she said clearly, despite her fear. "Whatever happens, don't give him what he wants." Hollister's grip on her arm tightened painfully. Brave words from a woman with a gun to her head. Flynn slowly raised his hands in apparent surrender. "All right, Hollister, you win." "I'll give up my badge. Just let them go." Hollister seemed surprised, then pleased. "Wise choice, Marshal. Throw your gun down first." Flynn reached for his pistol with 2 fingers, moving slowly. But instead of tossing it away, he fired in one fluid motion. The bullet struck Hollister's shoulder, causing him to release Rose and stagger backward. Chaos erupted as Flynn's men and Hollister's gang exchanged gunfire. Rose threw herself to the ground, desperate to reach Henry. Through the dust and confusion, she saw Martha pull Henry behind a large boulder for protection. Rose crawled toward them, bullets whizzing overhead. She was halfway there when she felt strong hands grab her and pull her behind a fallen tree. It was Flynn. "Stay down," he ordered, firing over the log at Hollister's men. "Henry," she began. "Martha's got him. They're sheltered. Deputy Miller is working his way around to them." Flynn paused to reload his pistol. "I'm sorry, Rose. I followed your trail as soon as I found out you were gone. I couldn't let you face him alone." A bullet splintered the wood near Flynn's head, and he ducked lower. Hollister's men are falling back. When I give the signal, run to that outcropping over there. He pointed to a formation of rocks about 20 yards away. I'll cover you. Rose nodded, gathering her courage. When Flynn shouted, "Now!" she sprang up and ran, hearing gunfire behind her but not daring to look back. She reached the rocks and pressed herself against them, gasping for breath. Flynn appeared beside her moments later. Miller's reached Henry and Martha. They're heading for the canyon entrance. We need to give them time to get clear. From their position, Rose could see Hollister shouting orders to his remaining men. His arm hung uselessly at his side where Flynn's bullet had struck him. "How did you know I was gone?" Rose asked as they waited for Miller's signal that Henry and Martha were safe. "Woke up with a bad feeling," Flynn said grimly. "Went to check on you and found the note." He turned to look at her, his eyes intense. "Don't ever do that again, Rose. I thought I'd lost you." Before she could respond, Hollister's voice rang out. "Finley, send out the woman and surrender, or I'll hunt down that boy if it takes the rest of my life." Flynn's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he told Rose. Then, to her horror, he stood and stepped out from behind the rocks. "It's over, Hollister," Flynn called. "Your men are deserting you. The federal marshal from Salt Lake City will be here by nightfall with 20 agents. There's nowhere left to run." Hollister raised his pistol with his good arm. "Then I'll die taking you with me." Rose watched in terror as the two men faced each other. Flynn's stance was steady, his hand poised over his holster. Hollister's face twisted with hatred as he prepared to fire. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Hollister fired first, his bullet grazing Flynn's arm. Flynn drew and fired in one smooth motion, his shot striking Hollister squarely in the chest. The outlaw stumbled backward, a look of surprise on his face, before collapsing to the ground. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hollister's remaining men threw down their weapons in surrender. Rose rushed to Flynn's side. "You're hit." Flynn glanced at his arm where blood was seeping through his shirt sleeve. "Just a scratch. Are you all right?" Rose nodded, tears of relief filling her eyes. "Where are Henry and Martha?" "They should be at the canyon entrance by now with Miller." Flynn put his arm around her shoulders. "Let's go find them." They made their way through the canyon, passing the disarmed outlaws now under guard by Flynn's men. At the entrance, they found Deputy Miller with Henry and Martha. "Mama." Henry broke free from Martha's hold and ran to Rose, who scooped him up and held him tightly, sobbing with relief. "Are you hurt, sweetheart? Did they hurt you?" Henry shook his head against her shoulder. "I was scared, but I tried to be brave like Marshal Finley would be." Rose looked over Henry's head at Flynn, who was watching them with an expression that made her heart swell. "You were very brave, just like the marshal." Later, after the wounded had been tended to and Hollister's men secured for transport back to Parowan, Rose sat with Flynn by a small fire. Henry was sleeping peacefully nearby, exhausted from the ordeal. Martha had dozed off as well, leaving Rose and Flynn in relative privacy. "What you did was incredibly dangerous," Flynn said quietly, breaking the silence. "Riding out here alone to face Hollister." "I had no choice," Rose replied, staring into the flames. "He threatened to kill Henry if I told anyone. What would you have done?" Flynn sighed. "The same thing, probably. But Rose, you have to understand what it did to me when I found that note, the thought of losing you." He trailed off, struggling with his words. Rose reached out and took his hand. "I'm sorry for scaring you, but I'm not sorry for trying to protect my son." "Our son," Flynn said suddenly. When Rose looked at him in surprise, he continued, "That is, I hope, what I mean is." He took a deep breath. "Rose, when I saw you standing there in that canyon with Hollister's gun at your head, I realized something. I realized that I couldn't imagine my life without you and Henry in it." Rose felt tears welling in her eyes. "Flynn, I know it hasn't been long," he hurried on. "And I know you might not be ready, but I love you, Rose. I love Henry, too. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you both." Rose looked at the man before her, strong, honorable, kind, and felt the last walls around her heart crumble. "Henry asked me last week if you could be his new papa," she said softly. I told him that was up to you. Hope blazed in Flynn's eyes. And what about his mama? What does she want? Rose smiled through her tears. His mama wants the same thing. Flynn drew her into his arms then, his kiss gentle but full of promise. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I swore to you once that they'd never touch a hair on his head. That promise stands, Rose. For as long as I live, I'll protect you both with everything I have. I know, she whispered. I believe you. 6 months later, on a bright spring day, Rose Davenport became Rose Finley in a simple ceremony in Parowan's small church. Henry stood proudly at Flynn's side, wearing a miniature version of Flynn's best suit, his face beaming with happiness. The town had changed since the confrontation with Hollister. With the outlaw gang disbanded, settlers felt safe to move into the area. Parowan was growing, with new buildings going up along the main street and families arriving weekly to start fresh in the promising territory. Flynn had been officially recognized by the territorial government for his bravery in bringing down Hollister, earning him a commendation and a raise in pay. But the recognition he valued most came from the townsfolk who trusted him and, more importantly, from the woman and boy who had become his family. After the wedding, as guests mingled and celebrated at the reception held in the town square, Flynn found a quiet moment with his new wife. Happy, Mrs. Finley? He asked, his arms encircling her waist. Completely, Rose replied, looking up at her husband with love. Though I'm still getting used to the name. You have time, Flynn said, kissing her softly. A lifetime, in fact. Rose rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. A lifetime sounds perfect. From across the square, Henry ran toward them, laughing as he dodged between the dancing couples. Flynn released Rose just in time to catch the boy and swing him up onto his shoulders. Papa, can we show Mama our surprise now? Henry asked excitedly. Flynn pretended to consider. Well, I was saving it for later, but I suppose now is as good a time as any. What surprise? Rose asked, intrigued. Flynn set Henry down and took Rose's hand. You'll have to come with us to find out. They slipped away from the celebration, Flynn leading them toward the edge of town, where he had built a new house over the past few months. Rose had seen its progress, but had respected Flynn's wishes to keep the finished interior a surprise until after the wedding. When they reached the house, Flynn lifted Henry up so he could push open the door. Go ahead, partner. Show your mama what we did. Henry ran inside, beckoning for Rose to follow. When she entered, she gasped in delight. The main room was beautifully furnished with items she had admired in catalogs but never dreamed of owning: a comfortable sofa, rocking chairs by the fireplace, bookshelves already filled with volumes. Flynn, it's beautiful, she breathed. That's not the surprise, Henry said impatiently, tugging at her hand. Come see. He led her to a door off the main room. When she opened it, Rose found a nursery, complete with a hand-carved cradle, a rocking chair, and cheerful curtains at the window. Rose turned to Flynn, questions in her eyes. I had a feeling we might need it sooner rather than later, he said softly. Henry helped me paint. I picked the color, Henry announced proudly. Do you like it, Mama? Rose knelt to embrace her son. I love it, sweetheart. It's perfect. Over Henry's shoulder, she met Flynn's gaze, a silent confirmation passing between them. Flynn crossed the room to join their embrace, his arms encircling both Rose and Henry. Welcome home, both of you. All three of us, Rose corrected gently, taking Flynn's hand and placing it over her stomach. Flynn's eyes widened, then filled with joy. Are you sure? Rose nodded, her smile radiant. Dr. Harrison confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to tell you today to make our wedding even more special. Henry looked between them, confused. What's happening? Flynn laughed, lifting the boy high. You're going to be a big brother, Henry. How do you feel about that? Henry's face broke into a delighted grin. Really? When? Not for several months yet, Rose explained. The baby needs time to grow strong, just like you did. As evening fell, the small family sat together on the porch of their new home, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Henry had fallen asleep against Flynn's side, worn out from the excitement of the day. "I never thought I'd find this," Flynn said quietly, his arm around Rose. "After the war, I wandered for years, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I didn't think I deserved happiness, not after the things I'd seen and done." Rose leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "We all deserve a second chance, Flynn. You gave Henry and me ours when you protected us from Hollister. You gave us a home, a family. You gave me so much more," Flynn replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me purpose again, a reason to build something lasting." In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the wedding celebration still going on in the town square, music and laughter carrying on the evening breeze. But here, on their porch, with their son sleeping peacefully and a new life growing within Rose, they had created their own perfect moment. "I love you, Flynn Finley," Rose whispered. Flynn kissed her tenderly. "And I love you, Rose Finley, now and always." As they sat together in contented silence, Rose thought about the journey that had brought them here, the fear and loss, the courage and hope, the promise of protection that had blossomed into so much more. From those first words Flynn had spoken when he saved them from Hollister, "They'll never touch a hair on his head," to this moment of perfect peace, their story had unfolded like the vast western landscape around them, challenging, beautiful, and full of promise. And as the stars continued to emerge in the clear Utah sky, Rose knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family.